The Pine Barrens of southern New Jersey had always been a place of whispers. For centuries, locals spoke of strange lights drifting through cedar swamps, of voices carried on the wind, of a creature with wings that stalked hunters under the full moon. But for Daniel Harper, the Barrens were not a place of legends. They were a refuge. It was the second week of September 2003, when Daniel packed his old canvas rucksack and drove his rusted Jeep Cherokee down Route 206, bound for Atchison Lake. At 27, he felt caught in a limbo of half-finished ambitions. His position at the geology department in Rutgers had turned into a dead-end postdoc. His girlfriend had left him, her final words sharp, "You're more in love with rocks than with me." Even his parents, once proud of his adventurous streak, had started asking when he would settle down and live a normal life. The Pine Barrens called to him in a way nothing else did. There was something honest in the stillness, something cleansing in the way the air carried both smoke and sweetness, like pine sap set aflame. He had hiked here since boyhood, often dragging his little sister Evelyn along, teaching her to skim stones across the Mullica River. He knew the twisting trails, the sandy soil, the black water bogs that could swallow a careless step. At the ranger station that morning, he signed the logbook with his usual neatness. Name, Daniel Harper. Route, Mullica River Trail, 3-day loop. Expected return, September 14th. The ranger on duty barely looked up, just stamped the page. "Watch the weather," he muttered. "Storm front might sweep in late tomorrow." Daniel only smiled. "I've been wet before." By late afternoon, he was deep in the woods, his boots sinking into the sandy trail, the canopy of crooked pitch pines closing above him. He carried with him a tent, 3 days of food, a compass and a battered journal he had been keeping since college. That night, camped beside the Mullica, Daniel wrote a single line before blowing out his lantern: "Silence is not empty. It is full of questions." The next morning he set off deeper. Witnesses placed him at a fork near Pleasant Mills, heading south. A hunter later recalled seeing him pause, hands on his hips as if listening for something. After that, no one saw him again. When Daniel failed to return by the 14th, his Jeep still parked at Atchison. The Park Service responded quickly. Search teams combed the trails. Helicopters droned overhead. Bloodhounds picked up a scent, then lost it near a patch of cedar water. Evelyn, 25, then rushed down from Trenton. She stood outside the ranger station clutching her brother's photograph, her heart hammering as volunteers filed past with maps and radios. "Have you found anything?" she asked again and again. But the answers were always the same: footprints fading into sand, a possible scrap of fabric, nothing certain. After 2 weeks, the official search wound down. The senior ranger gave her the line she would never forget: "Presumed not recoverable." Evelyn's parents tried to move on. Friends stopped calling after a year. The newspapers that once ran his picture moved on to newer tragedies. But for Evelyn, the forest had not released her brother. In the quiet hours of night, when her daughters were asleep and the house was still, she would close her eyes and hear Daniel's laugh, faint as the wind through the pines. 20 years passed, and still there was no body, no pack, no grave, only the silence of the Barrens. In the weeks following Daniel's disappearance, the Pine Barrens became a magnet for speculation. Search and rescue teams had scoured nearly 30 square miles, logging hundreds of man-hours. They had dragged ponds, swept the sandy firebreaks, even flown thermal cameras over the cedar swamps at night. Yet there was no trace of him, no boot prints after the first fork, no torn gear, no discarded wrappers. The forest, it seemed, had swallowed him whole. When no evidence surfaced, explanations filled the vacuum. At first the newspapers wrote him off as a casualty of carelessness. "Experienced hiker underestimates wilderness," one headline claimed. But those who knew Daniel bristled at the suggestion. He wasn't careless. He was meticulous, the sort of man who double-checked his compass and carried backup matches in a waterproof case. As weeks turned to months, the story left the news cycle but entered folklore. In diners along Route 206, in bars in Hamilton, in the kitchens of Chatsworth and Egg Harbor, locals whispered their own versions of what had happened. Some swore he had drowned in one of the cranberry bogs, his body sucked deep into muck. Others claimed he had run into trouble with hunters or stumbled upon an illegal still. But the most enduring theory, the one that curled like smoke through the Barrens, was that Daniel Harper had found something hidden. People began pointing to other disappearances, hunters lost in the 70s, campers who never returned in the 80s, and wove them into a single narrative. A hidden clan, they said. A group that lived deep in the woods, shunning the outside world, surviving on roots and game. Some called it a cult. Others softened it to a community. Whatever the name, it was always spoken with a hush, as if saying too much might draw its attention. Evelyn heard these whispers secondhand. In the months after the search ended, she returned to the pines again and again, wandering trails with binoculars and a notepad, interviewing anyone who would talk to her. Truck drivers told her they'd seen strange fires glowing at night deep beyond the trails. A cranberry picker said she'd heard chanting in the distance while working alone in the bogs. A teenage boy swore he'd seen symbols carved into cedar trunks, spirals etched with something like a knife. Evelyn wrote it all down, her handwriting shaky, desperate. Each story pulled her in two directions at once. Part of her convinced it was all fantasy, another part desperate to believe. If Daniel had stumbled into something, maybe he was still alive. Her parents wanted nothing to do with the rumors. They held a memorial service a year after his disappearance. There was no body, only a photograph in a frame, but people came, brought flowers, whispered condolences. Evelyn stood stiff through it all, her eyes dry. She refused to call it closure. Years stretched into decades. Evelyn went on with life because life forced her to. She married, had children, divorced, found stability as a teacher. But she never let go of her brother's face. Sometimes, when her daughters were young, she would catch herself staring at them and seeing Daniel's smile there, the same lopsided grin, the same spark in the eyes. At night, grading papers at her kitchen table, she would glance up at the family photo on the wall and feel the hollow open again. Every September she marked the date on her calendar, the day Daniel signed that logbook, the day he walked into the pines. She always felt it coming like a shadow across her skin. Some years she drove to Atchison and left flowers near the ranger station. Other years she stayed home, curled beneath a blanket, replaying old voicemail recordings of his voice. Yet the whispers about the barrens never faded. Stories continued to circulate, about hermits, about strange groups spotted moving silently through the underbrush, about fires in clearings where no trail led. Evelyn dismissed most of it, but sometimes in her most fragile moments she wondered, what if Daniel hadn't died? What if he had found one of those hidden groups, those others who lived beyond society's reach? 2 decades passed. The world moved on. The Jeep Cherokee had long been towed, sold for scrap. The ranger who had stamped Daniel's log retired. Her parents grew frail and passed away, leaving Evelyn the last keeper of her brother's memory. And then came the phone call. It was a ranger out of Wharton State Forest, a man she had never met. His tone was cautious, as if unsure how she would take the news. A surveyor had stumbled upon a derelict cabin, he explained. Inside, among the rot, he had found a bundle of papers. One of them was a map, hand-drawn, unusually detailed, depicting stretches of the Pine Barrens far beyond any official topography. In one corner, a circle was scrawled in charcoal marked with 4 words. The others wait here. Evelyn's breath had caught. She clutched the phone so hard her knuckles whitened. The ranger continued, his voice low. I thought you might want to see it. The place it marks, it's not on any map we have. For Evelyn it was as if the clock rewound 20 years. The hollow inside her stirred, not with grief this time, but with something sharper, more dangerous. Hope. The road into Wharton State Forest narrowed with every mile, the blacktop giving way to rutted sand. Evelyn's old Subaru groaned as it bounced over washboards, her knuckles tight around the steering wheel. Pines closed in on either side, their spindly trunks leaning, whispering in the wind. The late afternoon light was gold and fading, and in that glow the forest seemed endless, as if she were being swallowed 1 mile at a time. It had been years since she had come this deep. She had driven past Atchison countless times, stopped at the ranger station on anniversaries, but never ventured far beyond the trails. Too many ghosts, too many memories. Yet now she was following the ranger's directions, a scribbled set of turns on sand roads that had no names, only numbers that faded from the signs. When she finally pulled over, the ranger was already waiting. He was middle-aged with a gray beard and a red truck, his stance cautious but not unfriendly. You must be Evelyn, he said, offering a hand. His palm was calloused, his grip firm. I'm Ranger Coyle. Thanks for coming on short notice. She managed a nod, her voice thinner than she liked. You said you found something? Coyle glanced toward the tree line, where the shadows had already thickened. It's not far. I'll walk you in. They set off on foot, boots crunching on sandy soil. The air smelled of resin and dampness, of pine needles matted thick on the ground. Every so often, Evelyn caught a flicker of movement in her peripheral vision, a squirrel darting, a bird winging overhead, but the forest seemed unusually quiet, as if listening. How long's the cabin been there? She asked to break the silence. Hard to say, Coyle replied. It doesn't show up on any old plats. Looks like a hunter's shack but older. Whoever built it didn't want it found. He paused, glancing back at her. Surveyor came across it last week. I went to check it out and found the papers. The path grew narrower, winding between clusters of cedar. Then suddenly the trees opened to a small clearing, and there it was, a sagging structure of weathered boards, half swallowed by vines. Its roof leaned dangerously, shingles curled like dead leaves. One shutter dangled loose, creaking faintly in the breeze. Evelyn's chest tightened. The sight of it stirred something primal, as if she were standing at the threshold of a secret. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with mildew and rot. Light filtered through cracks, laying long stripes across the warped floorboards. A chair sat collapsed in one corner, a rusted lantern toppled beside it. In the hearth, long cold, a pile of ash still clung to the shape of logs. But it was the table that drew her. On it lay a bundle of papers, yellowed and curling. Pages of notes, scribbles about soil layers, sketches of trees and landmarks. Her hand shook as she reached out, fingers grazing the top sheet. The map. It was drawn with extraordinary precision, as though someone had spent months, even years, charting the barrens. Every bend of the Mullica River, every forgotten trail, every bog and hollow had been etched in charcoal. But what made her breath catch was the circle at the map's heart. A perfect ring deep in the woods with those 4 words scrawled beside it. The others wait here. Her pulse thundered. Coyle spoke softly. No name on the papers. But some of the handwriting, well, it reminded me of the logbook from back when your brother signed in. Evelyn's eyes snapped up. You think this could be Daniel's? I don't know, Coyle admitted. But whoever drew it knew these woods like the back of their hand. And they wanted this place marked. She stared at the map, her mind spinning. For 20 years she had lived with emptiness, the kind that settled in her bones. But now here was a thread. A direction. A possibility. Her voice trembled. What if this circle is where he went? What if... She couldn't finish. The thought was too dangerous. Coyle watched her carefully. That's why I called you. I figured you'd want to see for yourself. But I'll warn you, whatever's out there, if it's still there, it doesn't want to be found. The words settled over her like a shadow. For a long moment, Evelyn said nothing. She simply traced the circle on the map with her fingertip, as though by touching it she could bridge 20 years of silence. Then she folded the paper carefully, slid it into her bag and stood straighter than she had in years. I'm going to find out, she said. Her voice carried no hesitation now, only resolve. The wind sighed through the trees and for a moment it sounded like a whisper. The map sat folded on Evelyn's kitchen table like a secret she wasn't ready to touch. The paper was brittle, the charcoal smudged, but its presence filled the room. Every time she passed by, carrying laundry or setting down her keys, her eyes were drawn to it. That circle in the woods seemed to pulse with meaning, demanding she answer it. Her daughters noticed her distraction almost immediately. Mom, you've barely touched your dinner, said Claire, the elder at 19, a college sophomore home for the weekend. She pushed her hair behind her ear, watching her mother with wary eyes. Beside her, 15-year-old Hannah was already scrolling on her phone but glanced up briefly. Yeah, you've been acting. I dunno, weird. Evelyn forced a smile and speared a green bean with her fork. Just tired. Long week at school. But her daughters weren't fooled. They had grown up with her moods, the sudden silences around anniversaries, the way her voice trembled when Daniel's name came up. They knew there were rooms in their mother's heart they couldn't enter. After dinner, when Hannah had retreated to her room, Claire lingered in the kitchen. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, her gaze flicking toward the folded map. Is this about Uncle Daniel again? She asked softly. Evelyn's breath caught. She hadn't told them about the call, about the cabin, about what she had found. But Claire had always been perceptive, too much like her mother for her own comfort. It might be, Evelyn admitted. She sat down heavily, resting her palms on the table. A ranger found something. Papers. A map. Claire frowned. A map of what? The Pine Barrens, Evelyn said. Her voice shook despite herself. And there's a mark. A circle. With words that suggest there are people living out there. She paused, then let it out. I think your uncle might have been trying to find them. Or maybe he did. Claire's brow furrowed. She pulled out a chair and sat across from her mother. Mom, it's been 20 years. You can't keep chasing. I'm not chasing ghosts, Evelyn snapped, then immediately softened her tone. I know how it sounds, but if there's even the smallest chance. If Daniel was alive when he drew that map, then maybe there's an answer out there. Claire reached across the table, her hand covering Evelyn's. Her grip was warm, steady. And what if there isn't? What if you go looking and all you find is more emptiness? Haven't you punished yourself enough with this? The words stung, but Evelyn couldn't deny the truth in them. For 2 decades, she had carried the weight of uncertainty, of hope curdled into grief and back again. She had lived in the shadow of a question mark. Now, suddenly there was a direction, a path forward. I have to try, she whispered. That night, after her daughters went to bed, Evelyn spread the map out again under the lamplight. Her fingers traced the jagged lines of rivers, the curves of sand roads, the dense swaths of forest. The circle stared back at her like an eye. She began to plan. She dug her old hiking boots from the closet, dust coating their leather. She checked the tent she hadn't unfolded in years, patched the small tear with careful stitches. She pulled her brother's compass from a box of keepsakes, its glass scratched but still functional. Each item she packed carried a weight of memory. Daniel had taught her how to tie knots, how to tell north from the moss on trees, how to listen for the difference between a deer's tread and something heavier. She could still hear his voice. The forest isn't empty, Evie. It notices you. Tests you. And if you listen long enough, it talks back. Her stomach twisted with both fear and longing. To return meant facing not only the barrens but the possibility that what she found would break her heart all over again. She lay awake long past midnight, staring at the ceiling, her mind alive with images. The cabin's crumbling walls, the circle on the map, her brother's face frozen in time. Finally, she rose and went to the kitchen window. Outside, the night was still, the suburban streetlights glowing dull orange. But in her mind, she saw the dark silhouette of pines, endless and waiting. Behind her, Claire's voice came softly from the hallway. You're really going back, aren't you? Evelyn turned. Her daughter stood barefoot, arms folded, her expression a mix of fear and resignation. Yes, Evelyn said. No hesitation now. Claire looked down, then nodded slowly. Then promise me something. Promise you'll come back. The words lodged in Evelyn's chest. She crossed the room, pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace. I promise, she whispered, though a part of her knew promises were fragile things, especially in the pines. When she finally returned to bed, the map lay folded on the nightstand. And in her dreams, the forest whispered her brother's name. The morning Evelyn left for the Pine Barrens dawned gray and heavy with mist. She packed deliberately, every motion both practical and ritualistic. Boots laced tight, jacket zipped against the cool air, compass looped around her neck, and the folded map sealed in a waterproof pouch. Her daughters hovered in the doorway, silent. Claire kept her arms crossed, jaw tight, while Hannah stood with her phone dangling loosely in one hand, her wide eyes betraying a fear she didn't voice. I'll call when I have signal, Evelyn said, though they all knew service in the pines was a fickle lie. She hugged them both hard, memorizing their warmth, then shouldered her pack and forced herself not to look back as she slid behind the wheel. The drive south was familiar and alien all at once. Suburbs gave way to farmland, farmland to scrub, and then, suddenly, the pines. Miles upon miles of them, stretching flat to the horizon, their silhouettes like soldiers in ranks. The deeper she drove, the quieter it became, until even the hum of the engine seemed swallowed by the forest pressing close. At Atchison Lake, she parked where Daniel's Jeep had once sat 2 decades before. The lot was nearly empty, only a lone pickup truck idling with a fisherman unloading gear. Evelyn stepped out, inhaling the scent of pine needles and damp earth. It hit her like a blow. Memory crashing against the present, the sense that she was walking into a loop of time. She signed the logbook inside the ranger station, her pen trembling as she scrawled her name. Name, Evelyn Harper. Route, Private Research, Mullica vicinity. Expected return, September 19th. The young ranger behind the desk barely looked up. Stay on trail if you can. Forecast says storms by Tuesday. Evelyn managed a polite nod, tucking the map closer to her chest. If I stay on trail, I'll never find him, she thought. Back outside, she adjusted her pack straps and began down the sandy path. The forest closed in quickly, pitch pines leaning over narrow trails, cranberry bogs flashing red through breaks in the trees, the damp hush of cedar swamps muffling sound. Every step carried her deeper into memory. She could hear Daniel's voice in her head, teasing, instructing, reminding her to watch the soil for signs of water, to listen for the whippoorwills at dusk. Once, she thought she caught his laugh in the rustle of branches, so clear she froze mid-step. But when she turned, there was only emptiness. Around midday, she reached a crossroads where 2 sand roads met. She paused, pulling out the map. The circle lay far beyond these marked paths, deeper than she had ever gone. She traced a line with her finger, aligning it to the compass. So, always south. She chose the narrower track and pressed on. Hours passed, the sun high and unrelenting, then fading as the canopy thickened. Shadows stretched long. A sense of being watched prickled at her skin. More than once she stopped, scanning the trees, sure she had heard footsteps behind her. Each time, there was nothing, only the swish of branches and the distant cry of a bird. By late afternoon, she came upon an old man sitting on a log beside the trail. His clothes were ragged, his beard tangled, but his eyes were sharp as flint. A walking stick leaned against his knee, and beside him sat a battered tin cup. "You're far from the campsites?" he rasped as she approached. Evelyn hesitated, caught off guard. "I'm following a map," she said carefully. The man chuckled, low and humorless. "Maps don't mean much out here. Pines shift. Trails vanish. People vanish." His gaze lingered on her too long, unsettling. "What is it you're looking for?" Evelyn's throat tightened. She considered lying, but something in his stare demanded honesty. "My brother," she said. "He disappeared here. Years ago." The old man's smile faded. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Some people don't disappear. They get found. Chosen. And if you go looking for them, you might not like what you find." A chill ran through her. "What do you mean?" But he only shook his head, lifted his stick, and shuffled into the trees without another word. Within moments, the forest swallowed him whole. Evelyn stood frozen, the echo of his warning clinging like smoke. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Part of her wanted to turn back, to retreat to the safety of the lot, her daughters, her life. But then she touched the map through the fabric of her jacket, felt its fragile weight. She pressed forward. By dusk, she made camp in a small clearing. As she pitched her tent, the forest grew louder, the cries of night birds, the drone of insects, the rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush. And beneath it all, something else. A low hum, faint but steady as if carried on the wind. She sat still, listening, heart pounding. The sound rose and fell like chanting too far away to make out words. She whispered into the dark, "Daniel?" The forest gave no answer. Only the hum, threading through the pines like a promise and a threat. The morning broke with a thin veil of mist, curling low across the forest floor. Evelyn crawled out of her tent stiff and weary, her muscles aching from the pack and the restless night. She brewed instant coffee over her small stove, but even the warmth of the cup couldn't ease the unease in her chest. The hum she had heard the night before was gone, replaced by a silence so thick it pressed against her ears. She packed quickly, her hands moving with nervous energy. Each item slipped into her bag like a ritual of protection. Compass, map, knife, matches. She hoisted the pack onto her shoulders and set her course due south. The pines grew wilder the deeper she pressed. The sand underfoot gave way to patches of spongy moss and tangled roots. Thickets of scrub oak clawed at her sleeves, and the canopy overhead swallowed the sky. Hours passed, measured only by the sweat beading on her forehead and the rasp of her breath. It was mid-morning when she saw the first mark. At first she thought it was just damage, bark peeled back by a storm or an animal. But when she stepped closer, her heart gave a hard jolt. The shape carved into the trunk was deliberate, a spiral etched deep and darkened with age. Not random, not natural. She touched it with her fingertips. The grooves were rough, uneven, as though made by a crude blade. The spiral's lines widened outward in slow, perfect turns, leading her eye into its center. She pulled her hand back quickly, her stomach lurching. Daniel had once told her about signs in the woods. Hunters leave blazes on trees, Evie. Cuts to mark their way back. It's practical, nothing more. But this was no hunter's blaze. This was a symbol. She walked on, pulse quickening, and soon there were more. Another spiral, larger, almost hidden under a tangle of ivy. Then a series of straight slashes, 3 vertical lines cut into cedar bark like tally marks. The deeper she went, the more they appeared, as if guiding or warning her. By noon she came to a small clearing. The ground was churned up, the soil darker, fresher than the rest of the forest. At its center stood the remains of a fire ring, charred logs still black, ash scattered by wind but not yet washed away. She crouched, pressing her palm against the cold charcoal. Whoever had been here had left recently. Her throat tightened. This wasn't myth anymore. Someone was living here, moving here, marking the trees. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest trace of smoke, wood smoke, sharp and unmistakable. Evelyn froze, straining her ears. The forest was quiet, but her skin prickled with certainty. Someone was near. Her instinct screamed at her to retreat, to turn back before she stumbled into something she couldn't handle. But the map weighed heavy in her pack and Daniel's face burned in her mind. If he had found these people, if he had lived among them, then this trail was the only thread she had. She pushed forward. Hours later, her body sagged with fatigue. The heat pressed down and every sound of the forest seemed magnified. The snap of twigs under her boots, the flutter of wings above, the thrum of insects in the brush. She wiped sweat from her brow, then stopped suddenly. Ahead, dangling from a low branch, was something that made her blood run cold. A snare. It was crudely fashioned, rope loop tied to a bent sapling, designed to trap small game. Fresh mud clung to its fibers and a scatter of feathers lay beneath it. Evelyn's breath came shallow. This was no accident. The spiral carvings, the fire ring, now a snare. The pieces lined up into a truth too solid to ignore. People were here, deep in the barrens, living outside of maps, outside of law. Her stomach twisted with both dread and hope. She touched the compass at her chest, steadying herself, then whispered under her breath, "Daniel, are you here?" The forest gave no answer. Only the creak of the snare swaying in the breeze, like a silent warning. As the sun dipped lower, she quickened her pace. The circle on the map was still miles ahead, but every step tightened the knot in her chest. Signs were everywhere now, spirals, slashes, strange knots of sticks arranged at the bases of trees. Each one felt like a message she couldn't yet translate. By dusk, she made camp again, but sleep was slow to come. Her ears strained for the hum she had heard before, for voices she both dreaded and longed to hear. And sometime in the night, as her eyelids sagged, she thought she heard it again. The faint rise and fall of chanting, carried through the pines like a heartbeat. The air shifted just after dawn. The forest smelled different, sharp, electric, as though the pines themselves had caught fire without flame. Evelyn woke to a pressure in her skull, a heaviness that made her sit up fast and scan the gray sky above the canopy. Clouds were gathering, thick and rolling low. She broke camp quickly, folding her damp tent with fumbling fingers, stuffing her pack in haste. She had lived long enough in New Jersey to know the signs. A storm was coming, and not a mild one. By mid-morning the first drops began to fall, cold and fat. The sandy trail darkened to mud beneath her boots, and the trees swayed in a restless dance. The wind carried the smell of rain and something else, smoke, faint but distinct, as though the storm were flushing out hidden fires. She pushed on, head down, the map sealed tight in its pouch. The sky darkened further, until day resembled dusk. Lightning flashed in jagged streaks, followed almost instantly by thunder that rolled through the forest like the crack of mountains splitting. A branch snapped overhead, crashing to the ground so close it sprayed her with dirt. She stumbled back, heart hammering. The storm wasn't just weather, it was violence. She searched frantically for shelter. The pines were too brittle, too shallow-rooted. They could split at any moment. Then she spotted it, a cedar grove, denser, their trunks thick and twisted, roots gripping deep. She darted inside, crouching against one of the massive trunks as the storm broke overhead. Rain sheeted down, soaking her within moments. The world became noise, the roar of water, the cracks of lightning, the howl of wind tearing at branches. She hugged her pack to her chest, shivering, whispering to herself, "Just pass. Just pass." Then the lightning struck. A brilliant flash split the grove, blinding white, followed by a deafening crack as a pine not 20 yards away exploded, its trunk shearing in half. Splinters rained through the air like arrows. Evelyn screamed, covering her head. When she lifted her eyes again, blinking through the storm, she saw it. A figure. Far down the grove, between the curtains of rain, someone stood. Tall, still, half-shadowed. Her breath caught in her throat. At first she thought it was a trick of light, but then the figure shifted. The head turned. Even at that distance, she felt the weight of its gaze. "Daniel?" she shouted before she could stop herself, her voice torn away by the wind. The figure didn't move. Lightning flared again, and for an instant she thought she saw details. A cloak or ragged coat, something pale across the face like cloth or paint. Then darkness. She scrambled to her feet, sloshing forward a few steps. "Wait, please." But the figure stepped back, melting into the trees. The storm swallowed it whole. Evelyn collapsed against the cedar trunk, sobbing with frustration, rain mixing with tears on her face. She pressed her hands to her temples. Had she really seen someone? Or had exhaustion, fear, and grief conjured Daniel's shadow to torment her? The storm raged for another hour, battering her resolve as much as her body. By the time the rain eased and the thunder rolled east, she was soaked, trembling, every muscle stiff. She forced herself upright, legs quaking, and checked the compass. So, always south. But as she walked, she couldn't shake the image burned into her mind. A lone figure watching her through the storm, unmoving, unafraid. That night she didn't bother with a tent. She collapsed beneath a leaning pine, too weary to care, the wet earth seeping into her bones. Sleep came in fits, haunted by lightning flashes and a face she couldn't place. And in her dreams, Daniel's voice called through the storm. "Evie, turn back. You won't like what waits." She woke with a gasp, heart pounding, the forest eerily calm around her. The storm had passed, but the echo of that warning lingered like thunder in her chest. The morning after the storm was bright but cruel. Sunlight poured through the canopy, gleaming on rain-slick leaves, dazzling her eyes. The forest smelled of wet pine, cedar, and earth so rich it seemed to pulse. Evelyn rose stiffly, her clothes damp and clammy against her skin, her pack heavier than ever. Every step was a labor. Her boots squelched in the mud, each one feeling like it might suck her down. The exhaustion of the storm hadn't left her, it had burrowed deeper into her bones. By midday her legs trembled with each step. She stopped by a cedar swamp, where the water lay black and still, the roots of trees rising like twisted knees from its surface. She knelt to fill her canteen, then sat against a root, too drained to go farther. The map called to her from her pack, but she left it where it was. She knew she was still on the course south. For now, the weight of memory pressed heavier than the weight of navigation. She closed her eyes, and the forest gave way to another time. She was 12 again and Daniel was 16. They were hiking a smaller trail near Batstow, not far from their childhood home. Daniel carried the pack, teasing her when she tried to grab it. "You'll just slow us down, Evie," he said, laughing. His voice was warm, his smile wide. She had thrown a pine cone at him and he ducked, pretending to stumble. All right, you can carry the compass," he'd conceded, pulling it from around his neck and handing it to her like a sacred treasure. That was Daniel. Larger than life, a little reckless, but always pulling her into his orbit. Always making her feel she belonged. She blinked awake, tears streaking her cheeks. The swamp shimmered before her, its surface rippling though no wind blew. She wiped her face and drank deeply from the canteen, but the lump in her throat only grew. She trudged on. By late afternoon, feverish heat pressed against her skull. Her thoughts unraveled into fragments, memories bleeding into hallucinations. At one moment she swore she heard Daniel humming ahead, the tune they used to sing on car rides. At another she saw him crouched by a tree, carving something into the bark. She staggered forward, whispering his name. "Daniel, wait." The figure vanished, leaving only shadows. She stopped and pressed her back against a tree, her chest heaving. Was she losing her grip? Was the forest playing tricks, or was Daniel truly close? The storm had broken something loose inside her, and she could no longer tell where memory ended and the present began. Night fell before she realized it. Her body refused to carry her farther. She collapsed onto her sleeping mat without pitching the tent, too weary to care. The dreams came fast, heavy, suffocating. She was 23, sitting at the kitchen table with Daniel the night before he left for his solo hike. He had spread out his maps, tracing routes with his finger, eyes burning with that familiar excitement. "Evie, it's not about just hiking. It's about pushing into the parts people forgot. Finding what's left behind." "You sound like Dad," she'd said, trying to smile but failing. "Always chasing some hidden thing." Daniel had grinned, but then his eyes softened. "Don't worry. I'll be fine. I know these woods better than anyone. And when I come back, I'll have something to show you. Something real." The dream shifted, twisting. She saw him stepping into the pines, map in hand, but this time others emerged from the shadows behind the trees. Tall, cloaked, faces painted white. They closed in around him. Daniel turned back to her, eyes wide, lips moving. "Run, Evie." She jolted awake, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding against her ribs. The forest was silent except for the whisper of night wind through the branches. But in the distance, faint and low, she heard it again, the hum. It rose and fell, too steady to be the wind, too rhythmic to be accident. Voices carrying through the dark. She clutched the compass, trembling. "Daniel," she whispered into the black, "I'm coming." And the hum seemed to answer, pulling her deeper into the night. Morning came gray and heavy, with fog curling low between the trunks like restless spirits. Evelyn's body ached from the night on bare ground, every muscle stiff, but her resolve burned brighter than her exhaustion. The hum still echoed in her mind, though the forest itself had gone silent. She walked south, compass steady in her palm, her pace uneven but determined. The pines were endless, every tree a twin to the last, every turn a mirror of the one before. But sometime after midday she noticed something strange. A faint indentation in the undergrowth as if feet had once pressed here. Not deer tracks, not random breaks in brush, something deliberate. Her pulse quickened. She crouched, brushing aside pine needles. Beneath the debris lay soil packed hard, the ghost of a trail long hidden but not forgotten. "This isn't on any map," she whispered. The path wound between scrub oak and cedar, narrow and easily overlooked. She followed it carefully, each step sinking deeper into a sense of trespass, as though she had crossed an invisible threshold. The deeper she went, the stranger the evidence became. First, a rusted lantern half buried in sand, its glass cracked, the handle still looped as though waiting for a hand to carry it. She lifted it briefly, felt the weight of years, then set it back. Farther on, she spotted fabric snagged on a thorn bush, faded plaid rotted through, but unmistakably once part of a shirt. She pressed it to her nose, smelling only mildew and age. And then, most chilling of all, a small shoe. Child-sized, leather cracked and stiff. It lay at the base of a pine, laces still tied in a neat bough. Evelyn's stomach twisted. She crouched, fingers trembling as she touched the shoe. It couldn't be Daniel's, he had been 25 when he disappeared. But if there had been children here, living or trapped, what did that mean? The path curved sharply, rising along a ridge where the trees grew sparse. From here she could see farther, the endless waves of pines stretching in all directions. The isolation hit her hard. If she screamed, no one would hear. If she vanished, no one would find her. Still she pressed on. By late afternoon, the relics multiplied. A rusted axe head buried in moss. A cracked mason jar filled with something unidentifiable, sealed with wax. Piles of stones stacked deliberately at intervals, like boundary markers. Each discovery sent shivers through her, as if she were walking through the remnants of another world layered beneath her own. She paused at one of the stone piles, crouching to examine it. The rocks were weathered, their edges smoothed by years, but the arrangement was too careful to be natural. A spiral again, unmistakable, echoing the carvings she had seen earlier. Her breath caught. The spiral wasn't random. It was their mark. A language written across the forest. As dusk fell, the path led her to a clearing ringed by trees. In its center stood the remains of a wooden structure, long collapsed, its timbers blackened as if by fire. She stepped carefully among the ruins, the ground soft with ash and pine needles. Something glinted in the dirt. She knelt, brushing it free. A button. Old brass, dulled by years but still etched with a faint pattern. She clenched it in her fist, a talisman of something both lost and preserved. The forest grew colder with the setting sun. Shadows pooled in the clearing and Evelyn felt eyes on her, though no one stirred. She whispered into the silence, her voice barely audible. "Daniel, if you followed this path, what did you find?" Her only answer was the rustle of leaves and the faint return of that hum, softer this time, almost coaxing. She turned south again, deeper into the hidden trail, into whatever truth waited at its end. The hidden trail narrowed as evening deepened, weaving between pines so close their trunks brushed her shoulders. Evelyn's breath misted in the cooling air, her every step loud in the hush. She carried her flashlight but didn't switch it on. Instinct told her light would make her visible, and visibility here meant risk. The hum had returned, clearer now, no longer vague vibration but distinct voices. A cadence of sound rising and falling, too rhythmic to be mistaken for wind or birds. Chanting. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She moved slower, crouched low, keeping to the shadows. The trail sloped downward, and soon the faint flicker of orange glowed ahead. Firelight. She dropped to her knees, crawling forward until she reached the edge of another clearing. What she saw made her heart lurch. A circle of people stood around a roaring fire. There were perhaps 20 of them, their figures cloaked in ragged garments, faces hidden in shadows. Some wore hoods, others had pale cloths tied across their mouths. Their movements were deliberate, swaying in time to the chant that rose and fell with the crackle of flames. Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp. It was real. Not a hallucination, not a fever dream. They were here. The firelight threw their shadows high across the trees, twisting into grotesque shapes. She strained to hear the words of the chant, but they slipped through her comprehension, syllables strung together, guttural, hypnotic. Her eyes darted across the circle, desperate. Was Daniel among them? Could he be one of these faceless figures? The thought chilled her more than the night air. One of the cloaked figures stepped forward, raising a long staff. The chant shifted, louder now, almost jubilant. The others raised their arms in unison, palms open toward the flames. Evelyn's breath caught. She could feel the heat from the fire even from her hidden perch, could feel the vibration of their voices crawling under her skin. She shifted slightly for a better view, and her boots scraped against a stone. The sound was small, but in the forest silence it cracked like a gunshot. The chant faltered. Heads turned. For a heartbeat the clearing was frozen, the fire snapping in the void left by their voices. Evelyn flattened herself against the earth, heart hammering, praying they hadn't seen her. Then one of them moved. A tall figure, hood thrown back to reveal a face streaked in pale paint, stepped toward the treeline. His head tilted, listening. Evelyn barely breathed. The figure raised a hand, pointing directly toward where she hid. Another followed his gaze, then another. Murmurs rippled through the group, low and urgent. Panic surged in her chest. She scrambled backward, branches clawing at her arms, her pack dragging across the dirt. Behind her, voices rose, not the chant now but sharp words, commands. They had seen her. She turned and ran. Branches whipped at her face, roots caught at her boots, but she didn't stop. The forest blurred into streaks of black and silver under the moonlight. Behind her, footsteps pounded, voices shouting, chasing. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but fear propelled her forward. She veered off the trail, plunging into thicker brush, desperate to lose them. The chant had been terrifying, but the sound of pursuit was worse, raw, human, relentless. Somewhere ahead, the trees broke and she stumbled into open ground. The earth dropped suddenly and she tumbled down a slope, rolling, crashing through brush until she landed hard in sand. She lay gasping, every bone aching, staring up at the ring of treetops overhead. For a moment, silence. Then distant shouts, muffled by distance and trees. They hadn't followed her down. Slowly, she pushed herself upright, wincing at the sting of scraped skin and bruised ribs. She looked around. She was in a basin, a hollow shielded on all sides by steep banks and dense growth. The air here felt different, still, heavy, as though sound itself was trapped. The map flashed in her mind. The circle. She had found it. Evelyn staggered to her feet, realization cutting through fear. This was the place Daniel had marked. This was where the truth lay buried. But as she stood in the basin's shadow, she heard footsteps above, circling. Voices carried faintly down, searching, calling. She was close. Too close. And she knew now, there was no turning back. Evelyn's breath rasped in her throat as she crouched low, listening. The voices above circled like wolves along the rim of the basin. She couldn't make out the words, but their urgency carried clearly. They were searching for her, sweeping the treeline. She pressed herself against the slope, heart hammering. Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden, to wait them out. But the basin itself drew her gaze, pulling her deeper. It was larger than she'd first realized, its floor uneven, dotted with clusters of scrub and low bushes. The air was dense, unnaturally still, as though sealed off from the world above. Even the hum of insects was absent. Slowly, cautiously, she crept inward. The ground was different here. Sand gave way to dark soil, soft beneath her boots. She bent, running her fingers through it, and felt the odd chill of damp earth. A faint odor rose, musty, metallic, like old iron left to rust. Then she saw it. Half buried in the soil was a post, weathered and blackened. Not natural. Wooden, hand-carved, its surface etched with spirals and slashes. Around its base lay a scatter of bones. Her stomach lurched. They were small, animal, she told herself quickly, forcing the thought through panic. Rabbits, maybe deer. But the longer she stared, the less sure she became. Some were too clean, too human in their shape. She staggered back, hand flying to her mouth. The basin wasn't just a hollow. It was a place of ritual. The hum began again, so faint she thought it was in her head. But no, it carried through the air, seeping from somewhere deeper in the basin. It vibrated in her chest, low and steady. She turned, following it like a moth to flame. At the far edge, half concealed by brush, she found the entrance. A gap in the earth where the slope dipped, leading into a cave or tunnel. Dark, damp air spilled from it, carrying the hum like breath from lungs. Her pulse raced. This was it. This was what Daniel had marked. For a long moment she hovered at the threshold, fear battling resolve. Going in meant stepping past a line she couldn't return from. But turning back meant leaving 20 years of questions unanswered. She pulled out the map, unfolded it with trembling fingers. The circle stared back at her, ink faded but undeniable. She whispered, "You wanted me to find this, didn't you, Daniel?" A voice drifted faintly from above, closer now, sharp and urgent. Evelyn stuffed the map away. She couldn't stay exposed. She ducked into the darkness. The air grew colder instantly, damp and close. Her flashlight beam cut a narrow cone through the gloom, illuminating walls etched with more spirals, more slashes. The marks crawled over the rock like a language that refused to be forgotten. Deeper in, the tunnel widened into a chamber. She froze at its threshold. In the chamber's center lay a circle of stones, perfectly arranged. Atop them were objects, offerings perhaps. She stepped closer, the beam trembling in her hands. A cracked doll's head, its glass eyes dull. A pocket knife, blade rusted. A photograph, water-damaged but still visible. A family standing before a house, faces blurred by time. And at the far end, set into the wall, a crude altar of stacked rock. Dried stains marred its surface, dark against the stone. Evelyn's legs shook. Her mouth went dry. This was no accident, no natural hiding place. People had lived here. People had worshipped here. And maybe they still did. The hum swelled suddenly, louder now, filling the chamber. She spun, flashlight beam slicing across the walls. The sound didn't come from behind her or ahead. It came from everywhere, as if the earth itself was chanting. Her throat constricted. She staggered back, bumping against the altar, the cold stone jarring her spine. The hum rattled her bones, a vibration that seemed to burrow under her skin. Then silence, so abrupt it made her stumble. From above, faint but clear, came a new sound. Footsteps on the slope, voices calling down into the basin. They were close. Too close. She snapped off her flashlight, plunging herself into blackness. Heart in her throat, she pressed herself flat against the wall, praying the darkness would swallow her whole. The footsteps drew nearer and the basin filled with voices. She had found the circle. She had stepped into its heart. And now it was closing around her. The silence in the chamber pressed against Evelyn's skin, thick and heavy, until the voices above shattered it. Shouts ricocheted down into the basin, echoing through the tunnel like drumbeats. She pressed herself deeper against the damp wall, heart slamming in her chest. For a breathless instant she thought maybe, just maybe, they would search elsewhere. But then light spilled into the chamber. Torches. Boots crunched against stone. Evelyn swallowed a cry and bolted for the far side of the chamber, but there was nowhere to run. The passage ended in solid rock. She spun back as three figures ducked inside, cloaked in shadows and firelight. There, one hissed. Hands seized her arms before she could fight. She thrashed, her flashlight clattering to the floor, beams spinning crazily across the walls and the grotesque altar. "Let me go," she shouted, her voice cracking with raw panic. "I don't belong here." Her words bounced uselessly in the chamber. The grip on her arms only tightened, rough and calloused. They dragged her toward the entrance, her boots scraping against the stone. More figures crowded outside the tunnel, their faces lit by flickering firelight. Some wore hoods, others bone-white paint across their cheeks and brows. Their eyes gleamed with curiosity, suspicion, something darker. She struggled again, desperation lending her strength. "Please, my name is Evelyn. I'm looking for my brother. He was lost here, Daniel Marsh. Do you know him?" The name cracked the air like a whip. For a moment, the grip on her arms slackened. Murmurs rippled through the gathered figures. Daniel. They recognized it. A tall man stepped forward from the crowd. He carried no torch, yet the others parted for him, their deference palpable. His hood was pushed back, revealing a weather-lined face and eyes that glinted like flint in the firelight. "Bring her," he said. His voice was low, steady, and it carried the weight of command. They dragged Evelyn up the slope of the basin and into the open clearing. The fire she had spied on earlier roared at its center, embers lifting into the night like fireflies. Around it, the cult circled again, silent now, their chanting stilled as they studied the intruder in their midst. Evelyn's throat was dry, but she forced the words out. "Please. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm searching for answers." The tall man regarded her with unsettling calm. He moved closer, stopping just beyond the fire's heat. "You crossed into our circle," he said, each word deliberate. "Few ever find it. Fewer still leave." A chill swept her spine. "I didn't mean to trespass. She hesitated, then spoke the truth. "I found the map. The one marked with the spirals. My brother, he left it behind." At that, the circle stirred. Murmurs spread like wind through dry grass. The tall man's gaze sharpened. "Your brother?" "Yes," she whispered. "Daniel Marsh. He came here 20 years ago. He never came back." The silence that followed was heavy, electric. Faces shifted in the firelight. Some turned away, others fixed on her with new intensity. Finally, the tall man nodded once. Daniel. The name rolled from his tongue like an invocation. Yes. We know him. Evelyn's heart lurched. Relief and terror collided in her chest. Then he's alive? The man didn't answer immediately. He studied her, weighing her words, her trembling frame, her desperation. Then he said, "Come. You will see." He gestured, and the others moved to surround her, forming a shifting wall of cloaked figures. The fire's light blurred as they closed ranks, guiding her toward a narrow path leading away from the basin. Every step jarred through her body, fear clawing at her ribs, but hope pushing her forward. She had said his name aloud. They knew him. And now, whether she wanted it or not, she was inside. The forest swallowed Evelyn whole as the cult led her away from the basin. Their torches burned with oily smoke, casting shifting halos of orange across the pines. They moved in silence, boots padding across damp earth, branches snapping back into place after each passage as though erasing the trail behind them. Evelyn stumbled once on a root, but a firm hand steadied her, not cruel but unyielding. She glanced sideways and caught a glimpse of a painted face, pale streaks glowing faintly in the firelight. The person looked no older than her daughters. She wanted to speak, to plead, but the weight of silence pressed her lips shut. They descended into a hollow where the trees thinned. At first Evelyn thought it was just another clearing. Then her eyes adjusted and she saw them, structures. Crude shelters built from logs and salvaged tarps. Fire pits ringed with stone, smoke curling lazily into the night. Tools fashioned from scrap metal leaned against stumps. It was a village, hidden and primitive, carved out of the pines as though no modern world existed beyond it. Evelyn's stomach turned. For 20 years this had been here, unseen, unfound. Figures emerged from the shelters, drawn by the torchlight. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed and silent. Men with beards and women with long, uncut hair stepped closer, their faces lined by a hard life yet lit with something like pride. The tall man leading the group raised his hand, halting them. He turned to Evelyn, his expression unreadable. "This is what you were never meant to see," he said. His voice carried like the firelight, warm and cold at once. She forced her throat to work. "What is this place?" He swept his arm to encompass the village. "Home. Freedom. A refuge from the sickness outside. We are not lost. We are found." The words made her skin prickle. Her eyes darted, searching for him. "My brother, Daniel. You said you know him. Where is he?" For a heartbeat the man only looked at her, firelight glinting in his eyes. Then he gestured toward one of the larger shelters near the center of the clearing. The crowd parted as a figure emerged. He moved slowly as though pulled from deep thought, his shoulders broad, hair streaked with gray. His beard was unkempt, his clothes rough-spun, but the shape of his walk, the angle of his jaw, Evelyn's breath caught in her chest. "Daniel?" she whispered. Her knees nearly buckled. 20 years melted away and yet settled all at once in the lines of his face. He stopped a few paces from her, torchlight painting him with shifting shadows. His eyes locked onto hers. For a moment the world stilled. Then he said her name. "Evelyn." Her chest broke with a sob. She lunged forward, arms half raised, but her guards didn't move. Daniel lifted his hands slightly, halting her. The pain of that gesture was sharper than any blade. "Daniel," she gasped, tears cutting hot tracks down her cheeks. "I thought you were dead. I thought," her voice cracked. "Why didn't you come back?" He drew in a slow breath as if the answer weighed tons. "Because I didn't want to." The words hit harder than any blow. Evelyn staggered back, staring at him as if she'd misheard. "You didn't want to?" His gaze flicked over the circle of faces watching them. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice but not enough to hide it. "I chose this. They found me when I was broken, when the world outside had nothing left for me. Here I have purpose, family, belonging." "No," Evelyn whispered, shaking her head. "You were lost. You got trapped. You couldn't." "I could." His voice cut across hers, quiet but absolute. "I chose to stay." The firelight roared in Evelyn's ears, though she knew it was only the blood pounding in her temples. 20 years of searching, of hope and grief, undone in an instant by the truth. "You left us," she said, the words ragged, torn from her chest. "You left me." Daniel's jaw clenched, but his eyes didn't waver. "I left the world that abandoned me long before I walked into these woods. You wouldn't understand." The tall man stepped between them slightly, his presence like a blade. "She will, Daniel. She must. No one finds the circle by chance. She was drawn here as you were." The others murmured in agreement, nodding, eyes fixed on Evelyn with a mixture of suspicion and expectation. Evelyn felt the weight of their stares, of her brother's unwavering gaze, and the crushing collapse of everything she thought she'd come here to do. Daniel hadn't been stolen. He hadn't been trapped. He had chosen them over her. The crowd dissolved slowly, like mist retreating from the sun. Some returned to their shelters, some lingered by the fires, but their eyes never left Evelyn. The tall man gave a subtle nod, and the guard's grip on her arms loosened. She didn't run. Where could she run now? Daniel remained in the firelight, his presence both achingly familiar and utterly foreign. He stepped toward her, then tilted his head toward one of the shelters. "Come," he said softly. Evelyn's throat ached, but she followed, her legs heavy. Inside the shelter the air was thick with wood smoke and earth. A single lantern burned on a flat stone, casting a warm circle of light. The interior was sparse: 2 bedrolls, a crude wooden bench, bundles of dried herbs hanging from the beams. It was a place lived in, not merely endured. Daniel motioned for her to sit on the bench. She did, her hands twisting in her lap to keep them from trembling. He sat opposite, close enough that she could see the gray in his beard, the lines cut deep around his eyes. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence was unbearable, yet Evelyn didn't dare break it first. Finally Daniel sighed. "You shouldn't have come here." The words pierced her like a needle. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I had to. For 20 years, Daniel. 20 years I've been looking, grieving, wondering if you were alive or rotting in some unmarked grave. Do you know what that does to a person?" His jaw tightened. "I never wanted you to carry that weight." "Then why?" Her voice cracked, anger and anguish tangled together. "Why not leave a note, a word, something? Why vanish and let us think you were dead?" He leaned back, exhaling slow, steady, as though bracing against a storm. "Because if I'd given you hope, you would have followed me. Just like you did now." Evelyn's chest constricted. "You make it sound like I was wrong to love you enough to search." Daniel's gaze softened, but his words didn't. "I didn't want to be found. I wasn't lost. Not then. Not now." She shook her head, unable to reconcile the brother she'd idolized with the man before her. "We were a family, Daniel. Me, Mom, Dad." Dad drank himself into silence. Daniel cut in, his voice sharp. "Mom cried herself sick. And you held us together with tape and string. But you were a kid, Evelyn. None of it was fair. Not on you, not on me." His words hit raw, exposing wounds she thought had scabbed decades ago. She blinked hard, swallowing the lump in her throat. "So your answer was to walk into the woods and disappear?" His expression shifted, a flicker of pain passing through. "My answer was to find something that felt like living. And I did." Evelyn's eyes burned. "Living? Out here in rags, playing at rituals in the dirt." He didn't flinch. "Surviving. Belonging. Here we're not broken. We're whole. We see each other for what we are, not what the world wants us to be." The conviction in his voice sent a chill through her. This wasn't madness. It was belief. She whispered, almost afraid of the answer. "And you never thought of us?" "Of me?" Daniel's gaze faltered. For the first time since she'd seen him, his shoulders sagged. "Every day," he admitted. "But every time I thought of you, I told myself it was kinder to let you move on than to drag you into this life." Her tears came hot and fast, blurring his face. "You don't get to decide that for me." He reached across the small space, his rough hand hovering as though afraid to touch her. "I thought I was sparing you. But I see now I was only sparing myself." The lantern flickered, shadows stretching long across the walls. Evelyn searched his eyes, desperate for a crack in his resolve. "Then come back with me," she said, the plea raw in her throat. "Right now. We can leave this behind. You can meet my daughters. You can have a family again." Daniel closed his eyes. A single tear slipped down his cheek, cutting a line through the grime. When he opened them again, the resolve was back, sharper than ever. "This is my family now." The words hollowed her chest. She felt as though the ground had shifted, leaving her adrift. "Then what am I?" she whispered. Daniel's voice broke as he answered. "The one piece of me I'll never let go of, but can't bring back." The silence that followed was suffocating. Evelyn pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle the sob building inside her. At last, Daniel stood, his shadow stretching over her. "Rest tonight," he said. "Tomorrow they'll want to see if you belong here too. If not," he hesitated, "you'll have to make your choice." He left the shelter without another word, leaving Evelyn alone with the lantern, the shadows, and the unbearable weight of his truth. The dawn in the pines was a muted gray, mist clinging low across the ground as if the forest wanted to keep its secrets veiled. Evelyn hadn't slept. She'd sat hunched on the wooden bench in Daniel's shelter all night, replaying his words until they shredded her. This is my family now. When the door flap lifted at first light, two figures entered without speaking. Painted faces, hard eyes. They gestured for her to rise. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice rasped raw from hours of silence. One of them replied, monotone as though reciting a line, "To see if you belong." Her stomach clenched, but she rose anyway. What choice did she have? They led her into the heart of the settlement. The others were already gathered in a wide ring around the central fire pit. The tall man who had commanded her capture stood at its edge, staff planted firmly in the earth. His presence radiated authority, drawing all eyes without effort. Daniel was there too, standing slightly apart, his face unreadable. Evelyn's gaze caught his, but he didn't move toward her. He simply nodded once as though urging her to endure. The tall man raised his hand and silence fell. "Outsider," he intoned, voice deep and resonant. "You crossed into the circle. You spoke the name of one who belongs. Now you must face the flame in the silence, to prove whether you are meant to walk among us, or return to the world beyond." Evelyn's pulse thundered. Return. Did that mean escape was possible? Or was it a veiled threat? They ushered her forward until she stood before the fire. Its heat licked at her skin, the crackle loud in the hush. The tall man held out a carved bowl filled with dark liquid. "Drink." She recoiled instinctively. "What is it?" "Water drawn from the basin," he said, "to bind you to its truth." Her eyes flicked to Daniel. His face was solemn, but he gave the slightest nod. Her hands trembled as she accepted the bowl. The liquid smelled metallic, earthy, almost bitter. She pressed it to her lips and forced a swallow. It coated her tongue with a taste like rust and moss. She gagged but swallowed again, determined not to show weakness. A murmur of approval rippled through the circle. The tall man took the bowl back, then gestured to the fire. "Now the flame. Hold your hand to it. Let it mark you if you are meant to stay." Evelyn's breath stuttered. The fire roared, heat searing her face. She stared at her hand, at the pale lines of her palm. "If I do this, I'll scar myself. If I don't." She risked a glance at Daniel. His eyes bore into hers, steady, unflinching. Slowly she extended her hand. The heat bit instantly, sweat breaking across her skin. Closer. Closer. Her nerves screamed in warning. She clenched her teeth and pushed further until the pain flared white-hot. Then she yanked her hand back, cradling it against her chest. The skin was reddened but unburned. The circle erupted in a low chant, rhythmic, approving. The tall man raised his staff and the chant ceased. "You have touched the basin, you have faced the flame. Now silence." Two figures stepped forward and tied a blindfold over her eyes before she could resist. Darkness swallowed her. Hands guided her away from the fire, rough but careful. Her breath came fast and shallow. They led her somewhere. She counted her steps, felt the shift of ground beneath her boots, the cool shade of trees, then the damp chill of stone. A door creaked, heavy wood against stone. They pushed her inside, the air instantly colder. The blindfold remained, but she could hear the faint drip of water, smell the mildew of underground stone. The door thudded shut behind her, leaving her alone. The silence. At first, the quiet was a relief after the chants and fire. But as the minutes stretched, it thickened, pressing against her ears until it roared louder than any noise. She rocked slightly on her heels, arms crossed tight. Her mind turned traitor. What if she failed their test? What if they never opened the door again? What if Daniel? A sound cut through the dark. A breath. Not hers. Her body went rigid. "Evelyn," a voice whispered. Her heart leapt. It was Daniel. The blindfold shifted, he'd undone it. Dim light from a crack in the door outlined his face. He crouched before her, urgent, torn. "You have to be careful," he said. "They'll see every hesitation as weakness. They don't forgive weakness." She grabbed his arm, her voice breaking. "Then help me leave. Daniel, I can't stay here. My girls are waiting. My life is waiting." Pain crossed his features. "If you run, they'll hunt you. They don't let people go who know our ways." "Then come with me," she pleaded, desperate. "Now, before they decide anything else. We can go together." He pulled back slightly, eyes shadowed. "I can't. This is my place. It has been for years." Tears stung her eyes. "And I'm not part of that place?" His voice cracked. "You're the only part of me that still belongs out there." The door creaked again, heavy footsteps approaching. Daniel jerked the blindfold back over her eyes, his whisper a rush of air against her cheek. Be strong. Whatever happens next, don't show fear. The door opened, footsteps closing in. Hands seized her arms again. Daniel slipped back into the shadows, silent. The cult had tested her body. Now she knew they were going to test her soul. They brought her blindfolded into the clearing again. The heat of the fire washed across her face, the smell of smoke thick in her nostrils. When the blindfold was pulled away, the entire circle stood waiting. The tall man held his staff high, his voice carrying like thunder. She has touched the basin, faced the flame, endured the silence. Now she must be bound or cast away. A low murmur rippled through the gathered cult members. Evelyn's stomach churned. Bound. The word tasted like shackles. Two figures stepped forward, carrying strips of rough cloth dyed deep crimson. They knelt before her, holding the bindings out as though offering a gift. Evelyn's throat closed. What happens if I refuse? The tall man's eyes gleamed in the firelight. Refusal is exile. But no exile leaves this circle alive. Her heart stuttered. Around her, the faces leaned closer, painted eyes gleaming, expectant. She looked for Daniel. He stood near the edge, shoulders tense, gaze fixed on her. He didn't move, but his hand twitched, a subtle shake of the head. The crimson bindings hovered inches from her wrists. If I let them tie me, I'll never leave. If I fight. Her daughters' faces flashed in her mind. The kitchen table. The folded map. Their laughter. I can't, she whispered, barely audible. The tall man tilted his head. Speak louder. Her voice broke as she shouted, I won't. The silence that followed was absolute. Then the circle erupted, voices shouting, hands grabbing, the fire roaring higher. Evelyn tore backward, shoving against the figures nearest her. Someone caught her arm, she twisted, driving her elbow into ribs. Another hand reached, she ducked, grabbed a burning branch from the fire and swung it wide. The cult shrieked back, fear and fury mingling. Stop her, the tall man bellowed. Evelyn ran. She shoved through the ring, branches lashing her face as she broke into the forest. Behind her, torches flared to life, voices rising in pursuit. Her lungs burned, every step jagged with terror. The pines closed around her, roots grasping at her boots, thorns tearing at her skin. She stumbled but kept going, the image of her daughters pulling her forward. Shouts rang closer. A torch's glow bobbed between trees behind her. She veered off the trail, plunging into deeper brush. The forest swallowed her whole. Her foot caught on a root and she crashed hard to the ground. Pain jolted through her palms and knees. She scrambled up, but a hand clamped her shoulder. She spun with a scream, then froze. Evelyn. Daniel's face loomed in the flicker of torchlight. His chest heaved, sweat streaking through ash and paint. His eyes burned with anguish. She choked on air. Daniel, please. Come with me. We can't stay here. He gripped her arms, shaking his head. They'll kill you if they catch you. Then help me escape. For a heartbeat he only stared, torn in two. Then, with a strangled sound, he shoved her toward the trees. Go. Follow the stream, east. Don't stop. Tears blurred her vision. She clutched his hand one last time. Come with me. Daniel's jaw clenched. His voice was raw. This is my place. But you have to live for both of us now. Voices crashed through the trees behind him. He shoved her hard. Run. Evelyn stumbled, then sprinted into the dark, branches whipping past her face. She heard Daniel's voice rise behind her, calling to the others, drawing them away. She ran until her chest was fire, until her legs buckled, until the sound of pursuit faded into the endless pines. At last she collapsed at the edge of a shallow stream, gulping air, tears mingling with sweat and blood. She pressed her reddened palm to the earth, the faint spiral of pain from the fire trial burning into her memory. Daniel had chosen them. But he had chosen her too, by letting her go. And now she would choose her daughters. The pines seemed endless. Evelyn stumbled through the thinning trees, each step a battle against exhaustion. The stream she'd followed spread wider, its water glinting with morning light. And then at last she saw it, a dirt trail, pale and rutted, cutting across the forest. She collapsed onto it, gasping, her entire body trembling. For the first time in hours, maybe days, there were no shouts behind her, no torchlight flickering in pursuit. Only the hush of the trees and the slow rise of dawn. Her blistered palm throbbed. She lifted it, studying the faint scorch mark left by the ritual fire. The skin was reddened, swollen, but not ruined. A scar maybe. A reminder. She thought of Daniel, his last words echoing like a heartbeat. Live for both of us now. Tears welled, but she pushed herself upright. Her daughters. That was the only thought she allowed. She had to make it back to them. Hours later, the forest gave way to the fringe of a dirt road. Her knees nearly buckled when she spotted the faded trail sign nailed to a post. Wharton State Forest, Fire Road Access. Civilization. Her voice cracked as she shouted, "Help!" For a long moment, silence. Then, in the distance, the low growl of an engine. A Park Service truck rolled into view, sunlight flashing off its windshield. Evelyn staggered into the road, waving both arms, nearly collapsing again. The truck braked hard. A ranger leapt out, wide-eyed. "Ma'am? Jesus, you're hurt. What happened?" Evelyn could barely find the words. "Lost woods, please, my girls." The ranger caught her as she swayed, guiding her into the truck. "You're safe now. We'll get you help." For the first time since the basin, she let herself sag into someone else's strength. The hospital lights were too bright, antiseptic and sharp, but Evelyn clung to them. She let the nurses bandage her cuts, clean the burns, take her vitals. She answered questions numbly. How long had she been out there? What trails had she taken? Always skirting the truth. No one would believe it. And if they did, if they went looking, she knew what they'd find. Nothing. The pines hid their own too well. The door burst open hours later, and two small bodies hurled themselves onto the bed. "Mom?" Her daughter's sobs were warm against her chest as she wrapped them close, kissing their hair, whispering their names over and over. "I'm here. I'm here. I promised I'd come back." Their tears soaked her shirt, and her own joined them. She had never known such fierce relief. When they finally pulled back, she studied their faces, their fear, their love, their resilience. She touched the bandage on her palm, then cupped their cheeks with both hands. "No more secrets," she whispered. "I'll tell you everything someday. But for now, what matters is this: I came back. For you." That night, when they slept curled beside her in the hospital bed, Evelyn stared out the window at the dark stretch of horizon. Somewhere beyond it, the pines loomed, ancient and silent. And somewhere within them, Daniel walked among shadows and firelight, bound to a world she would never fully understand. She pressed her burned hand flat against the sheets, feeling the ache deep in her skin. It was a mark of survival, of truth. She had solved the map's enigma. She had seen what lay beyond the spirals. But she chose the living. She chose her daughters. And that, she realized, was the only way to win against the forest, by walking back out of it, carrying love stronger than any cult, any myth, any fire. Evelyn closed her eyes, her daughter's breaths soft against her. For the first time in 20 years, she let herself rest. Months later, Evelyn returned to the pines with a ranger escort, not to venture deep, but to leave something behind. At the edge of the basin trail, she pulled a folded scrap from her pocket, a copy of the old map. She set it inside a weatherproof jar, pressed it into the earth beneath a gnarled oak. "For Daniel." She whispered his name, let the forest swallow the sound, and walked away. Her daughters waited at the trailhead, their laughter bright in the crisp air. This time, Evelyn didn't look back.